portal, Mos Eisley is home to an elite rebel cell. Orders are to kill or capture all parties involved, but they're heavily armed and already on alert.
Microtransactions have been in the forefront of the gaming news landscape for the last couple of weeks, courtesy of EA and the rampant inclusion of loot boxes as a means of progression in Star Wars Battlefront 2. However, loot boxes have been a popular inclusion in games for a while. Although they were heavily popularized by Overwatch, CSGO, and Team Fortress 2, the real originator of the loot box as we know it was FIFA. However, I'm not here to discuss the history of the loot box, but more how to fight its inclusion in our future games. And for that, the best example to use is Star Wars Battlefront 2. Now, as I am sure some of you people watching this video might not be aware of the situation, regardless of how publicized it has been, I will go ahead and provide some background. In October 4, 2017, EA released the beta for Star Wars Battlefront 2. While playing the game, several reviewers and game pundits who had been given access to the closed beta noticed that the progression system for this game was tied entirely to loot boxes. These are packs of cards that include different abilities, upgrades, cosmetic items, poses, and several other in-game goodies. Now these loot boxes can be purchased with crystals, which are one of Star Wars Battlefront 2's in-game currency, the other one being credits. However, the cards that are included in each loot box are completely randomized, so while purchasing one of these loot boxes, you never know what cards are going to be contained within it until after purchased. Now, as we mentioned before, loot boxes have been an intricate part of the AAA scene for over a year now, ever since Overwatch popularized the practice. However, there is an additional sin that EA and DICE, publisher and developer of Star Wars Battlefront 2 respectively, committed. They tied in-game progression to the loot box system. As a result of this, and given that it was the intent of the developer for people to be able to buy crystals with real money, one could just buy a bunch of crystals, load up with loot boxes, and dramatically accelerate one's in-game progression, making one's character potentially overpowered in the multiplayer arena. As such, since one can essentially buy one's progression to significant advantages, the game got dubbed pay to win by the community, and deservedly so. This resulted in an outrage by the community over the pay-to-win nature of the then unreleased game. So EA and DICE released a statement where they stated that the upper levels of progression could only be attained through gameplay, and that a player could no longer just buy loot boxes and get a maxed out character, but they had to craft the upper cards, and they could only get the parts to do so from playing. Never mind the fact that one could still buy their way into a character that was 75% maxed out, and also get a lot of these crafting parts in order to craft those upper level cards from the loot boxes. But really, once EA and DICE released this statement, the outrage by the community did diminish a little bit. At least until November 11, when Reddit user The Hotter Potato posted the following comment on Reddit. To paraphrase his comment a bit, The Hotter Potato calculated the total amount of hours, or the estimated amount of money one would have to spend to unlock all sorts of different areas of progression in the game. But one of the most important ones was how to unlock Darth Vader or Luke Skywalker, two of the most popular heroes who were locked behind a whopping 60,000 credits. The revelation of these astounding facts resulted in an incredibly short-sighted Reddit comment by EA in an attempt to damage control. However, it backfired horrendously and became the most downvoted Reddit post in history, with over 670,000 downvotes at the moment of publishing of this video. As a response to this outrage, the developers decided to adjust the costs of the unlockable heroes by diminishing them in 75%, resulting in Darth Vader or Luke Skywalker costing only about 15,000 credits each. However, the developers also diminished the amount of credits received from completing the campaign from 20,000 to a measly 5,000 credits. Also, a lot of users pointed out that there was a timer in the arcade mode in which you could only earn a certain amount of credits, and then any further gains would be locked behind this timer. As a result of this, their gesture ended up feeling completely empty, fanning the flames within the community even further. The size of the outrage became such that even mainstream media began reporting on it, and since the launch date was imminent and EA had not gotten their shit together, Jimmy Pitaro, Disney's head of consumer products and interactive media, contacted EA. Although we cannot know exactly what was said, it is quite apparent that Jimmy Pitaro let EA know that they didn't want their franchise to be associated with gambling or public outrage in this manner. So evidently Disney was not happy with the kind of publicity that EA was bringing to one of Disney's flagship IPs. Additionally, reports started to come out that the Belgian Gaming Commission was starting to investigate the loot boxes included in the game to determine if they should be identified as gambling and as such be unfit to be included in a game marketed to children and either be banned from the country or receive a hefty fine. And so, with their tails between their legs and mere hours until the launch of Star Wars Battlefront 2, EA released one last statement. As you can read in the statement, all microtransactions were completely turned off from the game, temporarily, and they would not be brought back online until the game had been properly balanced. For any of you that do not speak corporate talk, allow me to translate. What this statement means in plain English is, as our greedy asses have been caught red-handed at trying to outrageously monetize a beloved kids franchise with glorified slot machines, we are going to turn off the microtransactions at launch, so that our overall sales of the game are not affected, and once the holiday season has passed, as well as the outrage, we will turn them back on full force at the beginning of next year, and resume our fleecing of the consumer. For your attention, thank you. After the release of the game, some other countries have joined into Belgium in their investigation of loot boxes, just like France and Australia, and even a member of the Hawaiian House of Representatives has come out with a communique against these greedy practices. But all of this sparks one very important question. How can we make sure that these practices are not included in the future titles? Now, while strolling around YouTube comment sections, I noticed that the main idea brought forth by YouTube commenters to make sure these overreaching practices were not included in future titles was, kill yourself, faggot. But the next one right after that one was the notion that if you do not enjoy microtransactions, just don't buy them, and that if enough people do that, the developers will stop including them in the future. However, what I think this point fails to understand is that if you do buy the game, but don't buy microtransactions, you are already a guaranteed sale. Now, let's say that 4/5 of the players that buy a specific game that contains microtransactions just do not buy these microtransactions. Well, that still means, for the developers, that the remainder 1/5 will just add up to the money that they have made out of the game, without impacting their baseline sale. In short, if the company makes $100 million from the sales of the game, but they only make $100,000 on top of that from the sales of microtransactions, since those $100 million are already secured, the $100,000 would just be the cherry on top. While this is an overly simplistic view of it, especially considering that microtransactions are so profitable, this still showcases that this method does not work to encourage companies to not include microtransactions in their games. There is, however, one method that does guarantee that they will remove them in the future games, and it is being showcased very nicely by Star Wars Battlefront 2. The first step is to showcase and publicize the microtransactions and the greedy practices included in a game through social media, ensuring that others join in on the outrage. This makes it so that the inclusion of these microtransactions and predatory practices are essentially seen as bad PR. Then, once the game comes out, just do not buy it. If enough people do these two things, then the potential profit that companies make from microtransactions cannot offset the loss from a poorly sold game. If you add to that a poorly sold game will have a very lackluster online community, and that then people will not be encouraged to buy microtransactions for this game, this will compound into a huge flop for the company, and thus they are less likely to include these microtransactions in their future titles. However, this can only work if the loss taken by adding microtransactions is bigger than the potential gains received by the company as a result of including them in. It is very important to note, though, that all of us have different thresholds regarding microtransactions and their inclusion in games. Me, for example, I do not mind the inclusion of cosmetic packages that can be purchased with real money, even though I have never really bought one, provided they do not affect gameplay, mind you, nor progression. I also do not mind the inclusion of DLC, as long as it is done to add to the game's experience and not to cut content at launch and then sell it to us little by little. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Destiny 1. However, I am completely against loot boxes in general and any microtransactions that affect gameplay, so I just do not buy any games that contain these. I also do not purchase season passes sight unseen. I only purchase them once I have made sure that I do want the DLC included in that season pass, once it has come out. But to each his own, you know? You draw your own line. There is, however, one additional point that needs to be brought up. Now, let's say that we do manage to abolish all microtransactions from the games, which would never happen, but let's say that we do, just for the sake of argument. What next? Well, if you think big-time developers and publishers would just take that situation lying down and keep developing games regardless, well, you are sorely mistaken, my friend. The actual response that we would get from this is the death of the $60 game. And actually, even though we're not abolishing all microtransactions, I believe that this is actually the future for us. As the community pushes back against these predatory practices, the developers are going to be forced to not include every microtransaction practice under the sun in their games, and by doing so, it will limit the amount of money that they can make from a title. Since they have very specific expectations of the amount of profit they need to generate from each title, then they will be forced to start repricing their games, season passes, and DLC in general. As a result of this, we find ourselves at a very particular crossroads where we are forced to choose our poison. Do you prefer to endure the grind brought about by games riddled with microtransactions embedded in their progression systems and just keep quiet to keep AAA titles at a steady $60 at launch, regardless of how much DLC and microtransactions make it so that the actual game costs a lot more? Or do you prefer to pay a higher amount upfront, knowing that a lot of these predatory practices will not be included within the game? If you ask me, as long as they actually remove several of these kind of microtransactions from their games, an $80 full game is a price I'm willing to pay. But you guys tell me what you think. Please let me know, what kind of microtransactions do you mind? What kind of microtransactions you do not mind? Do you like loot boxes? Are you a whale? Just let me know in the comment section. Also, I want to apologize, folks. In a previous video, I mentioned that I wanted to stream playthroughs of the Humble Bundle through Twitch. However, my computer actually died out on me. Well, the GPU, it's a whole thing. But I have been without computer for a little while, and I had to buy an inexpensive one to replace it. I also have had all sorts of situations going on in my personal life that have not allowed me to post as regularly as I would like. But I promise that this coming month I will return to my streaming in Twitch of the Humble Bundle full force. As always, if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up, it helps me a lot. And if you disagree with me, just let me know in the comment section. I try to answer to all of the comments. If you like this kind of content, consider subscribing to the channel, as I do post fairly frequently. Thank you very much for watching, folks. This is Cheps, and I will see you soon.